Welcome to the Rural Revival Podcast. I'm your host, Dana Larson. Today we're with Ed Roberson, host of the Mountain Prairie Podcast and Conservation Director at Palmer Land Trust in Colorado. We're talking about Ed's journey from real estate and the business world into land conservation, the podcast community that he's built, and the important work of conservation and how to get involved. We also touch on the unique opportunities rising up in rural America as a result of COVID. So here we go with Ed Roberson. Okay, well, we're here today with Ed Roberson of the Mountain Prairie Podcast. Ed, I'm so excited to have you on our podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. I'm a big fan of what you're doing.
Thank you so much. Well, tell us a little bit about your journey, where you grew up and your path to get where you are today.
Yeah, it's a crazy long story, and I'll try to keep it somewhat short and not boring, so people don't just like turn the thing off 30 seconds in. But yeah, I'm from Eastern North Carolina, a really little town called Tarboro, which is kind of halfway between the state capital of Raleigh and the beach. Grew up there. My family's been there forever. It's really, as we were talking about before we started recording it, there's some really interesting people doing interesting work there that you may want to speak with at some point. But it's a really great place to grow up. I mean, I think for people who aren't familiar with Eastern North Carolina, it was almost like a Mayberry type place, just a really neat place. My family had been there for generations. Grew up there, went to school there, went to college in North Carolina, worked in North Carolina for a few years right out of college. And I was kind of doing the normal path that people do when they're not really thinking about it. And I like worked in finance for a while with like Merrill Lynch and UBS and some of those big fancy banks. And then I got into commercial real estate in the Research Triangle Park area, selling office buildings and stuff like that. And, it's a good way to make a living. And it was good experience, but throughout the whole time, I just had this urge, and this thing in my head of like, I need to go out West. I need to go out West. Ever since I was a kid, I was just kind of obsessed with the big mountains. And, I just read an Outside magazine like a crazy person, and just, I wanted to be out West, but like I say, kind of half joking, but it's actually pretty true, is I think at age 22, I took myself too seriously just to go be a ski bum like I should have. I was kind of keyed up. I was like, I need to wear a suit and be a grown up, and, make some money and, all that kind of stuff, where I could have saved myself a lot of hassle if I had just gone out West and been a ski bum. But anyway, so I was selling commercial real estate and had kind of made up my mind, like, all right, I'm going to move out West. And I was 26, 27 at the time. I was like, I don't care. Like, I'm just gonna, if I have to go out there and wait tables, I'll do it. But I'm kind of ready. I need to scratch this itch. And I just started looking around for jobs, and I found out about a job called a ranch broker. It's like, what? There's like real estate agents for ranches. And so I started looking into it, and, started sending off my resume to a bunch of different ranch brokerage companies, thinking that I could convince them that selling an office building in Research Triangle Park somehow translates into selling a 100,000 acre ranch. But somehow I managed to convince one to hire me in Jackson Hole. And so in 2005, I packed up and moved to Jackson Hole. And it kind of coincided with the real estate boom. And it was a great experience professionally. It was a great experience because it got me out West in these places that I'd been reading about and rarely visited, but I had visited a few times, and it was great. Kind of fast forward, I went back to business school, and I can dig into this later, but went back to business school, got an MBA, and then eventually came back out. And now I've kind of taken a 180. I'm still in the land business and still dealing with ranchers and farmers, but I'm on the conservation side of things. And I'm the conservation director at Palmer Land Trust. And we really work in the southeastern quadrant of Colorado to protect farms and ranches, open space, and recreational open space. So it's an amazing job and I love it, and it's challenging and it's hard and has purpose. And so it's a lot different than what I started out when I got out of college thinking I was going to do. So anyway,
Yeah.
I might, there might be a book in there at some point, because there's some crazy stuff in there.
I think there should be. Absolutely. So would you say you've always had a love for the land, or is it just something that's grown on you over time?
I'd say it's definitely grown on me over time. I mean, like the real, like the love aspect and the respect for it. I've always loved the outdoors, ever since I was a kid. I mean, that's all I did was play outside, whether it was climbing, hanging out the top of magnolia trees. I think the majority of like age first grade through third grade when I wasn't in school was spent at the top of this magnolia tree in my in my yard, and then it transitioned into this ditch that went through our neighborhood. And so I was just, I was always into camping and hiking and fishing and just being outside. I mean, that's what I did. And I'd say most of the most meaningful experiences in my life, other than family experiences, have been outdoors, in the mountains. But, and so this love of the outdoors and of kind of adventure and pushing myself hard outdoors is what led me to move out west, or one of the factors that led me to move out west. But, when I was selling ranches there in Jackson Hole, I was working with real estate developers, and I was kind of facilitating their transactions, and they're buying these beautiful ranches and then eventually, unfortunately, tearing them up and subdividing them or building golf courses and that kind of thing. And I didn't, I wish I could say I saw what I was doing, but I didn't. And the craziest thing about it all is that the whole reason I went to business school to get my MBA was to be a real estate developer. Like that was, yeah, I mean, it could not be more different than what I'm doing now. I was, it was the real estate boom, 05 to 07. Everything was crazy. These people were making so much money. And I just kind of got caught up in that. And I was like, well, if these developers could do this, I could do this. And so I went to business school solely with the sole intent of being a real estate developer. And I got an internship at some fancy real estate development company between my 2 years. They hired one intern, and I got the job because I was so focused on getting it. And then, so I was in Washington, DC, wearing my fancy suit, going into the office. And then I had a really terrible health scare during that internship. I'd been there like 3 weeks, and I went to the hospital, and they're like, you got a tumor and we got to cut that out of you. And so it was, kind of long story, but ended up being fine. I recovered fine from it, but it kind of gave me this almost like a midlife crisis at age 30, where I was, it was a combo of having that health scare with, that was '08. So the economy was starting to dive. And so I started seeing that all these developers I'd worked with, bought up these ranches, subdivided them, built golf course, and then declared bankruptcy because, the whole real estate development world went upside down. And so I was sitting there thinking, well, I contributed to that. I helped them buy those places. And this is, I'm guilty, in some ways as guilty as they are of tearing up these places. And the whole reason I moved out there is because I love these wide open spaces. And here I am having contributed to the bad side of things. And so, it wasn't like an overnight switch, like you hear some people say, like, oh, this happened and then I saw the light. But it was kind of a slow process. But I realized that I needed to be spending my time on conservation, and I had these real estate skills. And at the end of the day, land conservation is real estate. That's what it is. And so I was able, I can use those skills for the better. And so it was, came back out west. My wife and I actually lived in Costa Rica for a year, which was a formative experience, and then moved back out west. And I started doing more and more conservation work. And I was still brokering ranches, but doing it with a conservation focus, and like helped Crested Butte Mountain Resort conserve a big property of theirs. I helped Eagle County buy a big property and that was conserved, and just really got into the conservation side of things, and then eventually made the switch over to full-time conservation, which is what I do now. So, it's kind of this, unfortunately, I had to kind of get shaken up to really see how important land was to me, but it's always been important, but now it's kind of like all I do. I mean, it's the focus of my work. So it's, And it still gets more important. The more I do it, the more I realize how important it is.
Yeah. Well, tell us about Palmer Land Trust and your work there.
Yeah, Palmer is it's a great organization. As I was on the board of directors, um, and I went to a board meeting and then toured some of the work they were doing, and then after about 3 months, I went to him and I was like, hey, do you think I could work here full time? And so I transitioned off of the board into a full time staff member. But it's a really wonderful organization. Been in business about 42 years. Um, a regional land trust, but we operate in southeastern Colorado, and we do everything from, we were just talking before we started recording about Red Rock's open space. That place has been conserved by Palmer, which is cool. And then what I do mostly is work on our agricultural land. So I work with farmers and ranchers to conserve their properties. And the interesting thing about Palmer is that, like if you look at the Nature Conservancy, they're a wonderful organization, but a lot of what they do is science based. It's based on ecology, which there's a definite need for that, and they do great work and they're a great partner of ours. But what Palmer does is focus on community. So it's kind of this intersection of the people and the community and the land. And I say intersection, but they're so deeply entwined that it's hard to kind of separate them, really. And so again, like I mentioned, mostly what I do is working with farmers and ranchers, and I'm the head of a project we're doing right now called the Bessemer Project, which is trying to figure out how to balance water use between growing municipalities and multi-generational farmers. Because out west, out here, there's a limited amount of water. And so as cities expand, they need water to expand. And the only place they can get water is by drying up farms, which generally does not lead to a good outcome. And so what we're trying to do is figure out a way so that cities can expand. We're not anti-expansion, anti-economic growth, but we don't want cities to expand at the cost of drying up farmland, because these farms are the lifeblood of a lot of these communities. And there are some really bad examples of what happens when you start drying up farmland and what it can do to a community, both, culturally, economically, environmentally. There's really no good outcome that comes from it if it's done incorrectly. And so what we're doing this really, really innovative project that's really exciting to kind of do it in the right way. And so it's been really fun. I'm learning a lot. It's really hard, hard in a good way. When I say that, some people look at me funny, but like, that's kind of how I define if something's good, if it's hard. And so it's hard, and the team is great. Rebecca Jewett is the CEO of Palmer Land Trust, and she's been on my podcast twice, so people can go and listen to her. And she's the reason I went to work there, because she's dynamic. She's a big thinker. She's a great leader. And it's really, really just been an awesome experience that I would have never imagined I'd be doing. I thought 10 years ago, 12 years ago, I thought I'd be a hotshot real estate developer. And now I'm doing the exact opposite. And it's great. Purpose-driven work is amazing.
Absolutely. It's funny how life works out like that, isn't it?
It is. It's bizarre.
Yeah.
Who would have ever guessed any of it, the podcast, but that's why it's cool,
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think conservation can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And some of that's based on where you live too. So what does conservation mean to you?
On my podcast, I used to ask people, like everybody, that question. And then I realized, like, I don't know. I don't have an answer to that question. I don't know what it means. I could talk. And I do think it can mean a million things. It can mean save the whales to somebody, or save the rainforest in Brazil. But I think the best, kind of the most succinct quote I've seen is Aldo Leopold wrote, "Conservation is a state of harmony between men and land." And you update that for our time, between people and land. And I think that's the best way to put it, because I'm not at all. I used to be, when I hadn't thought about it deeply. I used to think, oh, if you conserve a 50,000 acre ranch, that would equal get everything, get all the people off of it, and get all the livestock off of it, and just let it be a, quote, nature preserve. But then the more I learned, like, that's not at all good, especially in Colorado. You need ruminants like cows, bison, whatever, on the property for the health of the grasslands. And so, there's no way around it that people are here on earth, and that the earth has a relationship with people, and you can't find anywhere in the whole world that hasn't been affected by people. And so it's a matter of finding this balance between people and the land. And, that's like a lot of my work now is related to that. We're dealing with farmers, and there's irrigation, and there's machinery, and or with ranchers, they're grazing these lands. And so it's a matter is how do we find that balance? And there is no right answer, and it can change 100 times. It'll probably change over my career a lot of times, and it can vary depending on the circumstances. But just trying to find that balance between people and land. And I think you could back it out even farther than that and just say community and land, because that's what it all boils down to. And I feel like this current crisis we're in with COVID highlights it's highlighted the need for open space and the need for people to get outdoors, and it's highlighted the need for food production. And without those, we're kind of in big trouble as a species. We can't have food and we can't get outside. It's not good. And so it's a matter of finding that balance.
That's great. So if people want to educate themselves about conservation, where do you recommend they start?
I would say you start local, start where you are. There's something like 1,300 land trusts in the country, I think, and they vary in size. I think Palmer is, as far as acres conserved, Palmer's in the top 20 as far as land trusts. We've conserved almost 140,000 acres of land. But, there's some land trusts are one volunteer. And so, I think no matter where you live in the country, you can find a conservation organization that's doing work where you live. And, some of the stuff around land conservation can come off as being kind of boring sometimes, because a lot of it is this real estate transactions, it's deed restrictions and all this kind of stuff. And you can just see people's eyes glaze over when you start talking about it. But at the end of the day, it's about protecting places that you love. And I think it's hard to really love a place unless you've spent a lot of time there to really love it to the point that you want to protect it. And so start in your backyard. Like we were talking, where I'm from, Tarboro, North Carolina, the Tar River runs through there. And that's where I used to fish and canoe. And I spent a ton of time there. And there's at least 2 or 3 organizations in the state that are strictly devoted to conserving the Tar River. And that can mean different things. It can mean conserving land along the edges. It can mean doing innovative water work, but you basically find somewhere that you love and then get on the old Google and try to find some people that also love it. And they're probably working to protect it. And you have to work to protect, because if you don't, I'm not like one of these conspiracy people or anything, but the thing is, like, there are people and forces that don't want these places conserved. Mm-hmm. And they got a lot of money and power behind them, and they would rather see them used for other things, mostly see value extracted from them. And they don't understand the value of open space or of farmland and that kind of thing. And so there needs to be a counter pressure to that force. I mean, we're seeing it big time with public lands now, but it's just as strong, if not stronger, with private lands, which is what I do. So start local, find something you know about, and something that you don't need to spend a lot of time learning about, and just jump in. And the other thing is, all these conservation organizations are lean. And so they need help, and they need volunteers. They need board members. They need people that care. And I always kind of knew that in theory, because I used to be on a lot of boards, but now that I'm in it, like, I know it even more. Having engaged board members is huge. And so, that's the second step. Find something local, and then say, volunteer, say, hey, I want to help. How can I help? There's always need for help.
That's great. I don't get to listen to a lot of podcasts just because I don't have a lot of time, but one that I do listen to is yours, the Mountain Prairie Podcast. So how did that idea come about? I'm guessing it's birthed somewhere in this whole transition into your conservation world.
Yeah, well, in some ways, or actually in a lot of ways, I credit that podcast with getting me to flip the switch to officially move over from the business world into the conservation world. But yeah, so when I was selling ranches, I was selling all over the West. And so I was driving a lot, and I would listen to podcasts a lot. I mean, I used to listen to podcasts in like 2005, before anybody even, like, you had to download on your computer and then put it on the iPod and then plug that into your tape deck in your car. Like, it was a big, and so anyway, I'd been listening to podcasts for a long time, and I loved them. And I just kind of I had my feet in a lot of different worlds in Colorado. Like when I was in the ranching world selling ranches, but then I was also in the conservation and kind of like the environmental world. And sometimes ranchers and environmentalists don't get along that well, but I could see that they had a lot more in common than not. And just these labels cause people to not be able to kind of see the commonalities. And then like I read a lot of books, so I kind of in that world. And then I was also like in the ultra endurance running world doing these long runs in the mountains. And so I knew all these really cool people. And it was this common, like if you think about the Venn diagram, this common theme was that they loved the American West, the landscapes, the people, the communities, and they had so much in common. So I just thought, I bet, I'd go to lunch with these people and it'd be these super interesting conversations and they'd be gone. And so I thought, wow, I love podcasts. I'll just give it a shot. And I thought about it for like a year before I did it, and I wish I had done it. I wish I'd started a year earlier than I did, but I started with interviewing people I know. And then it just, over time, I started meeting new people and it expanded and expanded. And I think the first year of doing it, like, if you look at the number of downloads I'll get, like in 2 days now, it equals the entire first year. And so nobody listened, but it slowly caught on. And I think it resonates with people just because they're just all these interesting people doing interesting work, and they're all really good people, and they're all driven by a mission, they're driven by a love of what they do. And they're, some of them are super, super wealthy, and some of them live in their cars, but none of them are driven by money. None of them are like, I want to make a lot of money. They're driven by their craft or by their passions. And sometimes that equals money, sometimes it doesn't. And they don't really care, because they're doing what they love. So it's been inspiring. I think seeing those people and getting to know them and really developing some good friendships with them. I think that is what kind of finally gave me the confidence or the knowledge or whatever to quit with the business side of things and just do what I wanted to do. Because if I could do anything, it would be conservation. And I wasn't doing it because I felt like there wasn't earning potential there. And I'm so glad I made the switch. So yeah, podcasts, it's been great. I can't believe it. I feel like like we were talking about before, I don't know anything about media or radio, or I'm not a good talker. I say and and like a lot, but it's resonated with people for some reason. So I'm thankful for that.
Well, I love it. And I know that you've interviewed a few mutual friends that our listeners will know about, James Decker and Allison Ryan, which was another recent podcast. What would you say is the best part about the podcast?
I'd say it's the net, getting to know all these people and kind of the community that is built up around the podcast. And it's very strange, in a good way, but like, yeah, James Decker, he is awesome. And he's, and I met him through the podcast. Like, he listened to the podcast and we somehow connected, and I saw what he was doing. And I was so, I really admire what he's doing down there in Texas. And then, Allison, I met her, Allison's business partners are Jay and Jess, who were longtime friends of mine. But even Jay and Jess, I've known them for 30 years, but the podcast allowed me to reconnect with them because we've got these mutual interests that, we may not have had back when we were in high school together, which is crazy. But I'd say that, yeah, definitely the community. I mean, I've just gotten to know all these really amazing people and develop some legitimate friendships with them and learn from them. I say it kind of as a joke, but it's actually true that the podcast is completely self-serving because I just want to talk to these people and I just want to learn kind of how they operate and why they do what they do. And I've learned a lot from all of them. They're really inspiring people. And I think when you add it all up, if there's some really great lessons that can be applied no matter what you're doing or no matter where you live. These people just happen to love the West, but I mean, I think there are lessons there. I get emails from people like in New York or LA and, in these big cities that are huge fans of the podcast because they learn so much from all these people. And I don't have anything to do with it. They're not learning anything from me. They're learning from those people. And so it's just a matter of asking the right questions and, putting out, actionable info that people can learn from and use. And so I'm I'm really thankful that people have found it, because it's really been probably the most fulfilling professional thing I've done. I mean, it led to my job at Palmer. They listened to the podcast, and that's why they asked me to be on the board, because they knew me from the podcast. And so it has all the good stuff that's happened to me, I'd say, in my career recently all goes back to the podcast. So I'm just glad. Half the time I'm so damn embarrassed when I listen to myself talk, and it just drives me crazy, and I don't want to put it out there, but I'm glad that I was able to get over that and just get it out, because the rewards have been amazing.
Yeah, I agree. You kind of have to just put that to the side. Although I think you do a great job, but there's just something when we hear ourselves talk, right?
I think if you didn't think that, you'd be crazy.
Yes.
Like, I think who would sit around like, oh man, let me just listen to myself talk for a few hours here.
Yeah.
I'm so good at this. Yeah, you'd be like Ron Burgundy from Anchorman. Yeah, no thanks.
But I totally agree about this podcast as well. And to me, it's such an honor to be able to share these stories. And I think that's what hits me most all the time. Is just like, I feel honored to be able to do this and to get these stories out in the world, and to meet these people and know them. So
same. Yeah, I'm the exact same way. It's about half, I'd say half of my people that I have on the podcast are well known in their circles. And then the other half, may not be as well known, but they should be. And so, now that the thing actually has some people that listen to it, it really is. I mean, I do consider it a real honor to be able to shine a spotlight on some of the important work these people are doing. And that's the cool thing about the internet, is that it allows that to happen. Like, it's not this, there's not this mass media. Like, you can drill down to whatever your specific interest is, and there are a lot of people out there that share it. And so, you can shine a spotlight on these people that are doing really interesting work, and there's an audience that wants to hear it. It's really a powerful thing. It's hard for me to get my head around it in some ways.
Yeah, me too. Well, you've gotten to do some fun events around recording your podcast in front of a live audience.
Yeah, I never considered that would happen. And when I was in business school, I remember, like, the most terrified I was we had a we had to do a public speaking class, and had to talk for 5 minutes in front of my class of like 10 people. And I thought I was going to throw up. It was awful. And so the idea of getting up in front of hundreds of people never would have crossed my mind. But I'd been doing the podcast for like 2 years. And then I got an email from somebody at the Aspen Institute, which, in my, kind of weird world of interest, there's nothing I respect more than the Aspen Institute. It's just the smartest people. And I'm just in awe of the whole organization. And so I got this email from the guy at the Aspen Institute, and he said, hey, we're doing a 4-day event about the history of the American West. It's going to be, blah, blah, blah. We want you to come, and we want you to interview Hampton Sides on stage in front of 500 people. And I was like, first of all, Hampton Sides was my favorite author. And then the Aspen Institute's my favorite place. And I thought it was one of my friends playing a joke. Like, I looked at the email address and I said, this is not real. But it was real. And I went up there for 4 days, and you look at the brochure, and my picture is right alongside like Hampton Sides and Dan Flores and Sarah Danton, all these people that have been on the podcast, and got up there and talked about the book Blood and Thunder, which is one of my favorite books with Hampton, and didn't make a fool of myself, allowed Hampton to do his thing and got out of the way. And it was a wonderful experience. It was great. Got great feedback from the people at the Aspen Institute, who have no reason to not, to say anything other than what they exactly think. And so it went really well. And it was fun, and it was great. And so I just started, I have some friends and acquaintances that are have like legit really big podcasts that do a lot of live events. And I started talking to them, and I just decided to try to do one in Bozeman. So I did one in Bozeman that featured 4 women that had been on the podcast in the past. And they're just really amazing women doing really cool work. And that episode is on my webpage if people want to listen, but it was great. The sold a lot of tickets, people showed up, and then we had a big dinner the next night. That was a Friday night, and then had a dinner the next night on Saturday with just people that have been supporting the podcast. And it was like all these great people, and just this huge community of really cool people that I would not have known were it not for the podcast. I mean, there wasn't a single like high school friend there, anything like that. I mean, it was just this huge community that had developed around the podcast. So it was just a really neat thing. And I was supposed to do a lot more of them this year, but obviously that's on hold for a while, but we'll see when things get back to normal or whenever the new normal, whenever we can figure out what the new normal is. I hope to do more because it's fun. It's really, really fun.
I love that. Well, you've alluded a little bit to this, but you are an avid reader and you post a monthly or bi-monthly book list of some of the books you've been reading about the American West. What are some of your all-time favorite books? Because I mean, I see those lists and I want to read them all, but I don't have the time. So I want to
Yeah,
know
yeah.
what are the
Well, it's
best
funny
books
because
that I should read first.
yeah, and it's funny because in college, I don't think I ever finished a book that was assigned. Like, I don't think I don't know what I was doing, but I wasn't doing what they were telling me to do. And now it's almost like I read like a kind of crazy. But I'd say the most important book I've ever read is The Rise of Theodore Roosevelt by Edmund Morris. It's the first in a trilogy about the life of Theodore Roosevelt, and it's from his birth until the moment he assumes the presidency after, or it's really the moment he finds out that President McKinley got shot and that he's going to go from being vice president to being president. And I read that soon after that health scare that I'd mentioned. And so my wife and I, we were dating, then we got married, and then we lived in Costa Rica for a year because my wife got a job down there. It was kind of a transitional time for me trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And just, I don't know, just kind of a transitional moment. And so I read Rise of Theodore Roosevelt, and I'd owned it for like 10 years and I hadn't read it, and started reading it. And, you can say what you will about Theodore Roosevelt or his politics or whatever, but as far as his operating system, like what he did, how he lived his life, that really struck me. He talks about the strenuous life and about pushing yourself hard and how much, how much you can do if you are focused. And it really changed my perspective on what is possible. And just really, like, if you think about an operating system, it changed my operating system, and not instantly or anything like that, but I feel like that laid the groundwork. And I'm really obsessed with Theodore Roosevelt. But just everything he did, the way he was obviously purpose driven, and what he was able to accomplish before he was president. I mean, he was world class at least 5 or 6 different careers, other than president. I always say his time as president is the least interesting thing he did.
Huh.
I mean, he managed to do a lot, and I just really admire the way he operated. So I'd say that's the number one book. As far as books about the American West, Blood and Thunder, the one I mentioned earlier by Hampton Sides, that is just a really good book. And that was kind of one of the first history books about the West that I read that I really loved. And I've gotten to know Hampton pretty well, and he's a great guy, just a great guy, and a immensely talented writer. And so if people want to learn about the American West, that's a good one. And with Kit Carson getting kind of re-examined as he often does, but in this moment in history, it's a good thing to learn about Kit Carson because Hampton doesn't give him any breaks. He paints a very accurate picture of the guy. And then, as far as Theodore Roosevelt, another good book I just read, and I just released a podcast with the author, is called Leave It As It Is. And it's about Theodore Roosevelt and his work with public lands and conservation. And it's a very timely book because some of the downsides of Theodore Roosevelt, like his treatment of Native Americans, David Gessner, the author, really looks at it clearly and doesn't make excuses for any of his behavior. And so that's a great one if you want to learn about public lands and the history of public lands. But I got a million lists. I think there's a list on my website. I wrote one up, and it was like the 20 most important books I've read in the last 10 years. And so there's, but the thing is, even since I wrote that, I've already read some other ones that were super important. So
Maybe it's time for
there's literally like hundreds of recommendations on my website. So yeah, you can check it out.
Yeah, we'll link to that in the show notes. I love it. What excites you most about the future of rural America? Because you're working in that every day and with the people who live there. So where do you see the most opportunity?
Yeah, in my world and what I do all day long, the thing that excites me, and it's a result of COVID. It's crazy that we're in the midst of this pandemic, and how it's upended everything. But I'd say there are some bright spots, and the world is going to be different when we're coming out of this. And so it's, I think rural America is actually in a pretty good spot for figuring this thing out and for offering some solutions. One of the things that I've talked about ad nauseum for years is the importance of food production, local food production within the U.S., how we don't want to be importing all of our food from other countries. And you talk about it kind of ad nauseum, and people seem to agree with the theory, but don't think about it deeply. And, you don't have to, I would always say, you don't have to think too many levels out before it becomes a national security issue, where if we're importing all of our food, we're at the mercy of all these other countries. And you would say that and people would agree, but that was kind of the end of it. And then, mid-March of this year, it took about 5 days for people to really get that concept deeply in their psyche. And they understood it very, very clearly, because they go to the grocery store and there's nothing there. And they're talking about the meat processing system collapsing, and just, all of a sudden it's like, well, where are we going to get our food? And like real food. I'm not talking about the processed stuff. I'm talking about real food. And so I feel like, in my world, there's nothing but upside for farmers. It's a tough business, and there's millions of factors that make it a tough business. But I really think there's an opportunity to, there's a, the public is very aware of how important food production is now. And so a lot of these rural communities, I think, farms, what used to be this open field that a real estate developer might think, well, I could put a bunch of houses there and make a lot of money. I think the community would rather, they see the value in it being a farm now. And so I just think there's going to be a lot of opportunity. And then, I think a lot of people are seeing that cities may not be as great as they thought they were, for a lot of reasons, and in some ways it just doesn't work. Like you can't go on public transportation. So from what I hear, a lot of people were reevaluating city life, and with everything going remote, why sit in an apartment paying all this money when you could be, in a smaller town enjoying life and doing the same work. And so I think it would be great if we see a lot of these people, in cities moving into rural communities, because they want the community, and they want a better way of life. And, you hear about brain drain, that's the term you hear with these small communities, like where I grew up. But it's almost like the reverse could happen. I don't know, we'll see what happens, but it's almost like, I don't know what the reverse would be, but this human capital descending into towns. And so when you get money, you get the creative ideas, new ideas, building on the foundation that a lot of these rural communities have already established. So I think there is opportunity. Because of all my reading of history, when you look at any crisis, there are winners that come out. There will be winners that come out of this crisis, and things are going to change. And so, why not be the winner? Why not make rural America the winner? Because somebody's going to win. So, and it isn't just going to happen. So there needs to be focus there. But I think there's nothing but upside for agriculture. I shouldn't say nothing but upside. There are a lot of factors that make that a challenging business, but the public understands it now, which I can't say has been the case for even in the last 10 years since I've been working in it.
Yeah. And with so much technology too, I just think it's really neat to see how farming has evolved because of that.
Oh yeah. It's amazing. One of the one of my mentors out in Eastern Colorado in the Lower Arkansas Valley is a guy named Dr. Mike Bartolo. And he's been very helpful for me as I've kind of tried to get my head around farming. And he runs one of the research stations for Colorado State University out in Rocky Ford, Colorado, which is, as rural as you can get. But you go out on this place and like they've got a whole field, and there's this little like manhole in the middle of it. You can go down in the manhole, and they've got the whole field is on a scale. And so they can like measure rainfall and it's some of the most high tech stuff you've ever seen. And they've got all these different plots where they're measuring different sunlight and figuring all this stuff out. And so you think that's this one little town in Eastern Colorado that you could drive by it in 5 seconds on the highway. And so I just wonder how many different things like that are happening throughout the West, or throughout the whole country. Really, it's really inspiring to see. And people like Mike they don't want any attention.
Yeah.
They don't want to, they're not like egomaniacs. They're not trying to like blabbing about how great they're doing. They're just doing their work. And
Mhm.
it's really making the world a better place. And it's really, it's just so inspiring to see and to spend time with people like that. Cause it rubs off, at least it's rubbed off on me. It's been great.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's part of the farmer way of life is this humbleness and they don't want to talk about it. But I think it's important for them to talk about it because we need to know about that stuff that's happening.
I agree completely. And they're so committed to what they're doing because they're in it because they love it. Cause that is a tough business. And there are just so many factors that are out of their control. And I learn a lot just by hanging around them. Just again, talking about like the operating system of Theodore Roosevelt. I think the operating system of a lot of farmers, it's almost like this Zen
Yeah.
outlook on things where they focus on what they can control and don't get too hyped up about what they can't. And there's a lot of lessons to be learned from them. And at the end of the day, you talk about essential workers. I mean, there's
Yeah. Right.
nothing more essential than what they're doing. They're producing food. I mean, I think food and air and water. I mean, that's as basic as it gets, and that's what they've devoted their lives to. So it's really it's inspiring, and it's inspiring for me to get to spend time with them because it's really it's fun. I learn a lot. They're funny. It's a good deal. And they accept me with my Eastern North Carolina accent. They don't kick me off their property.
That's awesome. What's next for you and for Palmer Land Trust and for the Mountain and Prairie podcast?
Yeah. Well, on the Palmer front, it's all systems go. It's amazing. I think a lot of organizations and businesses are kind of hunkered down, during over the last 4, 5, 6 months, trying to figure out, just trying to keep it together. And the great thing about Palmer and, our leadership under Rebecca and the team we have in place is that we're expanding. We're going full systems ahead. And, so we just got a big grant from Great Outdoors Colorado to hire 2 new people. One to work exclusively on that Bessemer project that I talked about, and then one to expand some of our open space. And we actually just had a new employee start today. And so I feel like, people, like I said, people have seen the importance of open space and they've seen the importance of farming. And so we've luckily been able to fundraise around that, and we're going to be able to expand our work. And I think, again, back to my study of history, when you look at a lot of the biggest businesses in the United States or in the world, a lot of them started during times of crisis, like during the Depression, or like all these .coms that are doing so great now. A lot of them started during, 07, 08, 09. And so I think if you can figure out a way to expand and to keep going forward during downtimes, there's going to be huge payoffs to that down the road. And so that's what we're doing at Palmer, and we're doubling down, and we're going really hard, and we're hiring new people, and we're expanding. And so, there is risk involved in that, but we're focused on that. And so there's going to be a lot of opportunity when things get back to normal. So I'm very excited about that full plate of work at Palmer. And then for the podcast, just continuing to crank it out. I try to do an episode every other week, meeting all these great people. I'd love to write a book at some point. I've got 2 little girls and my wife, and, I try to exercise a lot, and I do a lot of running. And so it's kind of I'm kind of busting at the seams as far as hours in the day, but I think there's a interesting book in all the podcast stuff as far as, kind of consolidating all the lessons learned from all these interesting people. And so, I've been working on that a little bit, and we'll see. I'd love to do more live events, but not going to focus on that too much now. We'll see how things play out. But yeah, everything is full speed. I mean, I don't know how. I wish I had more hours in the day.
Right? Yeah. Wouldn't that be great?
Yeah, or either maybe if I didn't have to sleep. I wish I was one of
Yeah.
these people who had to sleep like 4 hours a night, but that's not me. I got
Yeah.
like they say Theodore Roosevelt was an energetic sleeper. That's how I am. I'm very serious about my sleep. So yeah, all good. Everything's great.
Good. Well, I just would encourage our listeners to go check out Ed's podcast if you haven't already, because I think you will identify with a lot of the things that you talk about there. So how do we follow along and keep up with the things you have going on?
Yeah, you can go to mountainprairie.com for all the podcasts, and that has links to everything. It has all the book lists, all the old episodes. I have a bi-monthly book recommendation email I send out, and it's so 6 emails a year. No spam, not joking or no funny business. I'm not going to sell your info, but just it's like probably every other month I send out maybe 5 or 6 books that I've read that are good that I recommend. I recently started a weekly newsletter different from the books called Good News from the American West, and it's only good stories, no negative stuff, because I'm so tired of all this negative stuff. And some of the news that's negative, we need to examine this, and we need to focus on it. We need to find solutions to problems, but it's overwhelming how negative everything is. And so this email every Wednesday morning is just a quick email with 4 or 5 bullet points of stuff that will make you smile. And I do that again. It's completely selfish because I'm like, I'm going to be positive. I'm not going to. So, and then at Palmer Land Trust, you can go to palmerlandtrust.org and check out all the work we're doing. But probably unless you live in Southeastern Colorado, you can look at our website, but I would encourage, instead of going to that, go to a land trust in your own community and see what they're doing. Cause it's, they could use your help. If you're listening to this podcast, I would imagine you're the type of person that gets things done and wants to be involved and is, thinking about things beyond, watching Netflix or whatever. And so I think you can, I would encourage you, come to Palmer Land Trust, see what we're doing, but then find one in your own community. And if you can't find one, send me an email and I can direct you to one.
Perfect. All right. Well, we'll link to that in the show notes. Ed, thank you so much for being on the podcast. This has been great.
Thank you very much. And thank you for everything you're doing. I know how hard, and in a good way, but how hard the keep cranking these podcasts out over time is. And I'm very impressed with your podcast and everybody you've had on. So I honored you had me on. Thank you very much.
Well, I love the work Ed is doing both with Palmer Land Trust and through the Mountain Prairie Podcast. And I know I personally have learned a lot through listening to his podcast. I would highly encourage you to go check it out if you haven't already, and we have links to that in the show notes. I'm also really excited to start reading through Ed's 20 most influential books list, and as I finish each book, I'm going to gift it to one of our listeners. So stay tuned for more information on that. I trust you're super inspired from today's episode and probably have a handful of people you know would love to hear it. So go ahead and text them the link and leave us a kind review while you're at it so we can keep spreading the Rural Revival message far and wide. And find us on Instagram and Facebook at Rural Revival Co. to stay updated on this podcast and all things Rural Revival related. And we'll catch you next time on the Rural Revival Podcast. Have a great day, everybody.